right, so here we are with my good friend, Rebecca Sheppard. So, Rebecca, if you don't mind, introduce yourself, sister.
Thank you, Shay. Thanks for having me tonight. Yes, my name is Rebecca Sheppard, and I am one of the co-founders of Stand4thee. Stand4thee started in November of 2020. Oh my gosh, I can't believe we're still in this situation. Never really done any type of activism before. Activism, I don't even know what to call this, right? My background is project management. I've been a project manager for 20 years, which translates very well to what I'm doing with Stand4thee. In the beginning, as mentioned, not having kind of any activist background, didn't know didn't know what I was doing or where I was going, and would just kind of like hit the ground running. Now we're very focused in what we're doing. We're, we've got the blinders on. We're laser focused. One of our big areas is helping people with self-representation in the courts. What we're seeing right now is legal professionals that are not helping people the way that they should be. And in some cases, they're actually not taking direction from their clients. And instead are telling them, if you don't take a deal, I'm going to drop you. And I have the evidence to back this claim up. I'm not just making this up. The other big thing that we like to do is to give people information so that they know what their rights are. So teaching people about their rights, helping people to understand that we actually have the legal provisions that help us, and that in fact, the government, at all levels, are the ones who are actually violating legislation. So we help people to understand what their rights are and how to assert them. And now we're focused on holding the government accountable, and that is not through overthrowing the government. That is not through any type of revolution, because we don't need to do that. We have the legal framework to protect us. So again, it's knowing our rights, understanding what they are, and asserting them. And as you know, Shade, it all comes down to the beautiful Bill of Rights, which says it is an act in recognition of our rights under the supremacy of God. So there's a big learning component for us, because when I started this, I was like, Canadian Bill of Rights, that's American. No, we have a Canadian Bill of Rights. And going through the court system, there's a lot of resistance with judges and JPs. And I'm just going to say this again. JPs are not legally trained. They are not legal professionals. They are legally trained when they're hired to serve as a justice of the peace. And I think this is a complete miscarriage of justice for people like myself who have quarantine tickets, who are going into provincial courts where our civil rights matter is being adjudicated by a person who does not have a legal professional background. I think this is a big problem. So there's a big learning curve, not just for us.
Let's go with that one for a moment, if you don't mind. So for
Sure.
example, right? So for example, a lot of times I'm sure you've heard some folks say, well, you can't use the Canadian Bill of Rights because these are provincial policies or provincial mandates that they put in. But of course, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, because what you're suggesting is that I don't have my rights in the provinces, even though I have it in the nation, which absolutely makes no sense. But these folks that are considered JPs are, quite frankly, ignorant. And I've been often saying lately that actually there are times where ignorance eventually becomes indeed malice. And that's what's going on, correct?
100%. So a couple of things. Folks there's a lot of pushback on the Bill of Rights. Number one, there's a notion that the Charter of Rights supersedes the bill. And that's completely false. Section 26 of the Charter states that existing rights and freedoms are to be respected. And also we have ample amounts of case law and legislation that states otherwise. The best example is the Nunavut Legislation Act from 2020, which states that the government of Nunavut is to vet legislation through the Bill of Rights to ensure that it is not infringing on people's rights.
In fact, the Emergencies Act.
I was just.
Were you going there? Well, then you keep going, sister.
Yes,
you keep going. Go.
Yes, and this is again going back to this education component, because don't get me wrong, there are MPs who are 100% WEF infiltrators, UN infiltrators, absolutely, and that includes the executive level. Freeland, Blair, Lametti, Mendicino, Trudeau, all of those guys. We know that. They're on the WF website. They're all connected. But there are some who are not. But they have no idea about the Bill of Rights, because there's, again, this idea that the Charter supersedes the bill. So while the Bill of Rights is included in the Emergencies Act, which is post-Charter, the Emergencies Act is 1985, and it states...
Do you mind, can you pull that up for us, Dom, so we can show the folks, if that's okay?
Thank you, Shade. So
no problem. I want to show everybody that what you're saying is right here.
Yep.
No, we're going to stay on that, Dom. Thank you, bro. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, no, we need to go to the Emergencies Act. It's far to the left. There you go. Perfect.
There you go.
I'll scroll from here. So what we want to do is go here to the preamble. Yep. And there it is right here for anybody who needs to see it. In the third paragraph, it says, and whereas the governor and council in taking such special temporary measures would be subject to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Canadian Bill of Rights. And again, like Rebecca just said, 1985, which is 3 years after the charter was kind of put in our face in some shape, way, or form. And of course, the ascension to this was in 1988. So this further proves that what Rebecca Sheppard is saying, that the Canadian Bill of Rights was not overrided, this further proves that position. So please do continue, Rebecca.
Mm-hmm. And also, let's continue with this statement here, that and whereas the governor and council in taking such special temporary measures would be subject to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Bill of Rights, and must have regard to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, particularly with respect to those fundamental rights that are not to be limited or abridged, even in a national emergency.
Not to be limited even in a national emergency. So that leads me to my next question to you, because when I read that, I'm going to suggest strongly that my position, I think I'm allowed to have a strong opinion as a Canadian citizen, that essentially feels, quite frankly, that Mr. Trudeau and some of his friends somehow managed to criminalize my civil liberties. That if I went to work, somehow I was a criminal. That if I had grandma and grandpa over for Christmas dinner, I was a criminal. That if I didn't receive certain kinds of medications that they insisted upon, somehow I was a criminal. They actually criminalized informed consent. And so I have a huge issue with that.
Well,
and here's a situation where
they didn't criminalize it. They made you believe that they did.
Well, they were trying to. I'll go with that. They were trying to. And some folks really did, right? Some folks got convinced that I was indeed being a bad, naughty boy for not doing
what you were told to do.
Because it was opposite to what I believed to be proper. In other words, like, for example, when did it become illegal for me to have more than 5 people in my home? When did that start? Well, the answer is it's not illegal, yet they convinced people through these unrighteous decrees, as I like to quote the Bible on that. They're called unrighteous decrees. Through these unrighteous decrees, they caused many folks to believe that suddenly I was behaving illegally, even though all I was doing was the exact same thing I was doing the year before, which was having Thanksgiving dinner with grandma and grandpa. So this is further proof here that that's the attempt. And this is where they like to use the charter, right? Because it's the opposite in many ways than the Canadian Bill of Rights. So please continue. So, well, actually, let me ask you this. Did they invoke the Emergencies Act legally or not? Because I'm of the position
no, they did
it
not.
Was not. Okay.
No,
all right.
They did not. So there are grounds, and if you scroll down to, I think it's 17 bracket 1,
right.
Because this was a public, so there's 4 types of emergencies in this Emergencies Act. And the one that they declared is a public order emergency. So here we go. This one right here.
Yep.
So a declaration of a public order emergency is that when there is a public order emergency exists and necessitates the taking of special temporary measures for dealing with the emergency. And then, there's supposed to be this little consultation under Section 25 with the provinces before they declare it. And it says in here that a declaration of public order emergency shall specify what these things are. But if you scroll, actually, up at the very top is where
Section 3?
It might be, yes.
I think it's Section 3, because this is where I thought, well,
That's
this
right.
is where they were way off. They didn't hit these markers.
No, they did not. So again, this is the application and construction. So national emergency, for the purposes of this act, a national emergency is an urgent and critical situation of a temporary nature that seriously endangers the lives, health, and safety of Canadians and is in such a proportions or nature as to exceed the capacity of authority of a province to deal with it. Seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada that cannot be effectively dealt with under any other law of Canada. So let's start with point A. First of all, out of the 10 provinces, only 3 asked or said that they were aligned with the Emergencies Act being declared. Ontario, Newfoundland, of all places, and Manitoba. Manitoba said, on a limited basis, like let's limit the scope here. Not all Canadians need this applied to them. And what's interesting is if you look at the report from the House of Commons, the report on the Public Order Emergency Commission, it talks about the consultation with each of the provinces. What is just mind blowing is that when it gets to BC, it says that BC was aligned with declaring the Emergencies Act. Are you ready for this? Listen to what I'm going to say here. According to media reports. What do you mean? According to media reports from what? CBC, the liars? 69% funded by government? Those people? So we don't even know, based on this report, did BC agree to the act or not? Did they agree to the invocation or not? And Newfoundland, what does this matter? Like, how did this impact Newfoundland at all? You know, they had a march down the middle of the street? Oh my God, people are going to die.
Well, I also learned in this process, by the way, just to keep the folks who are watching this video informed, that the criminal code actually has a section 63.
That's right.
So, because see, police officers, right, and I believe it's the OPS, right, that has the power to shut down an assembly according to section 63 in our criminal code, and yet they didn't use this.
That's right. And
that almost in and of itself suggests that the police weren't requesting any kind of thing here, because
we know it's a matter of fact, because in the Special Joint Committee on the Declaration of the Emergency and in the Public Order Emergency Commission, the OPS, the RCMP, the local police all said, we didn't ask for the Emergencies Act to be invoked. And period. And exactly, Shade, the police at any point could have said 63 bracket 1, or they could have invoked bylaw, which they didn't do until the end. They could have said, okay, because you can see right here in section 63 bracket 1, that it becomes unlawful, will disturb the peace tumultuously. Well, if the horn honking was, if people felt that it was doing that, then why didn't they just say, you know what, 63 bracket 1, you guys got to go, and start ticketing people at the very least? They didn't do that until the very end. And also, what was the other thing? Shoot, I just had a brain. Can you go back to the Emergencies Act for me again?
Absolutely.
Right. So again, seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety. there was this, the mainstream media was putting out reports saying, oh, there was, trying to make violent crimes an issue at the protest. Yet when the police went on the stand in the Public Order Emergency Commission, that is not the case. There were no violent crimes. There were crimes that took place in Ottawa that were completely separate from the convoy. There was an attempted arson at an apartment building that they tried to pin on the convoy people. It had nothing to do with that. Apparently, they tried to say that there were weapons found. Not true. I think there was 5 violent crimes through that whole, I think it was just over 3 weeks in Ottawa. And none of them were related to the convoy. So where was the threat? Where was the threat to lives, health, and safety? As a matter of fact, the homeless were fed.
And again, if that was true, they could have just went Section 63, because there's a whole process invoke the Emergencies Act, right? Which actually, based on my studies, they didn't go through these processes properly in any shape, way, or form, best as I can tell. And if anybody kind of researches this, there's a process, and that's what that whole governor and council is all about. And they didn't hit the marks on that, and they missed it by miles based on my research. So please, maybe also kind of let the folks know what you know about that.
Exactly. So there's supposed to be a vote that's done in the governor and council. So just to clarify what governor and council means, governor and council is not governor and council is the entire federal cabinet. It is not the governor general. It is not an NMP. It is the federal cabinet, which is the executive branch of the government. So all of the ministers, so Minister of Health, Minister of Emergency Preparedness, Minister of Public Safety, Minister of Transport, all of the executive branch are supposed to vote on the declaration. And then that goes through the Privy Council, and the Privy Council's job is to vet any orders, regulations, legislation, anything to do with, prohibitive acts through the Statutory Instruments Act. And again, the Statutory Instruments Act, post-charter, 1985, states that all of these regulations, acts, rules, laws are supposed to be vetted against the Canadian Bill of Rights to ensure that they are not infringing on our rights under the Canadian Bill of Rights. Again, this is 1985.
Do you mind if we show that?
No, absolutely.
Show that. Statutory.
And this is the job of Bill Blair's office, which is the Privy Council. Bill Blair is the president of the Privy Council, and Bill Blair was one of the ministers who was part of the declaration. Bill Blair is a terrible man.
All right, and this is it. Should I go to short titles? That makes sense?
Go to the HTML, and then you will see. Then you can search for. Just go up to the top a little bit. Go up a little bit further, Shade.
Yeah.
And then up at the top, you'll see just under the title there. Go up a little bit more, and you'll see a file document HTML.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. You click on that, and it'll pull the whole document up. And then you can just do a search for Bill of Rights. Do Control F.
Oh.
Yeah, do Control F.
If I recall, it was in Section 3 of this, wasn't it?
Is it? I'm not sure.
Yeah, there it is.
There we go.
It.
There we go.
There we go. Yep.
There we go. Section 2. So examination of proposed regulations. So the clerk of the Privy Council, again, Bill Blair is the president of the clerk of the Privy Council. It says examination on receipt by the clerk of the Privy Council of copies of a proposed regulation pursuant to subsection bracket 1. The clerk of the Privy Council, in consultation with the Deputy Minister of Justice, shall examine the proposed regulation to ensure that Section C, subsection C, it does not trespass unduly on existing rights and freedoms and is not in any case inconsistent with the purposes and provisions of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which who cares, and the Canadian Bill of Rights.
That's the mama.
That's the
That's
mama.
the mama right
Right
there.
there. Mm-hmm.
See, it had, and so once again, we'll just remind folks, because I think it's important, that the Canadian Bill of Rights doesn't have that Section 1 that the Charter has, that says essentially that the government can override our rights. And it's very, very simple. If it's the first 4 lines of the Charter, Canadian Bill of Rights does not say that in any shape, way, or form. It has no loophole for them to override the rights, because bottom line is, as far as I'm concerned, that's what the criminal code is for, right? So our freedom and rights document doesn't need these loopholes, but they put it into the Charter so they can criminalize things that, quite frankly, aren't criminal.
Well, let's also take a step back on that, Shade, because as we see in the description or in the title of the Bill of Rights, it states an act in recognition of an act for the recognition and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. And the Charter does not say that. The Charter says that the government is giving you your rights, and it guarantees them here within. And whenever there's a guarantee, there's a limit. So,
Limited guarantees.
This is the fundamental difference between the two, just right off the bat. This isn't saying here are your rights. It's saying we're going to recognize your rights, we're going to codify your rights, and we're going to protect your rights in this codified law. Whereas the Charter is saying Big Brother is going to give you your rights, and Big Brother is going to guarantee them, but only within these confined parameters. And Big Brother's also going to say, if there's a reason for us to limit your rights, we will. And the further kick in the pants is that if your rights are violated, I believe it's Section 24, I always get 24 and 27 mixed up, states that if your rights are violated, meaning after your rights are violated, you can apply to a court of competent jurisdiction to have your case heard.
So basically, they come take my rights away, right? And say, and if you didn't like that, you can come and ask us if it was okay for us to do that to you. Mm-hmm. Well, and no, if we just, right?
Well, first you got to apply. They could say, no, we're not going to hear it.
Right. So you can ask if they'll let you tell them, and they may go, nah, no, we're cool totally with what we did to you. And so that's how the Charter is essentially set up, whereas the Bill of Rights is not set up that way at all. And this one has what we like to talk about here, royal ascension. This one was signed by all 10 provinces, becoming a federal statute.
It didn't have to. This didn't have to get signed by the 10 provinces. This went through the House. This is a piece of legislation. It didn't require any type of approval from the prime ministers, or sorry, from the premiers. So this is a different type of. This is basically a piece of legislation, a piece of federal legislation.
No, but hold on a second. Hold on. I'm pointing at the Canadian Bill of Rights right now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So continue.
Yes. This is not, because this is not part of the Constitution, right?
Okay.
It has constitutional authority,
right?
But it is not part of the Constitution. Whereas the Charter was an amendment to the Constitution Act, and it required the signatories of the provinces, which we didn't even get that.
That's right, because Quebec did not sign, correct?
Right. Okay. But the Charter of Rights does have royal assent. Just not royal assent in Canada. It has royal assent in the UK. In
UK, that's what I was going to say, which is somewhere else clearly. And so the other thing that the Charter doesn't have is this right here, which I think people need to really pay attention to, is the enjoyment of property. It doesn't even have it in there.
No.
Although even if it did, again, they could limit it, take it away, blah, blah, blah. So it almost pretty much doesn't matter even if it was in there. However, that should be a big red flag to anybody who enjoys any of their property. And this is any property, correct? Because even if you rent your apartment,
exactly.
Anything that you have. Do you like enjoying your property? Because that right there is not in the Charter. And that's why we are feeling very grateful to Mr. Diefenbaker. And by the grace of God, we have this federal statute that says it is our legal right to enjoy our property, right? And this is something, for example, the Charter doesn't have because of some folks back in the day from the ever so popular WEF.
Well, this enjoyment of property was in the original draft of the charter. If you look back at the Special Joint Committee on the Constitution, 1980 to 1981, Perrin Beatty had put forward the draft of section. It's actually Section 7 of this Special Joint Committee, and it had enjoyment of property in there. And then Sven Robinson, who was NDP, i.e. socialist, i.e. one step away from communism, said, well, no, you can't have enjoyment of property in there, because if you have enjoyment of property in there, then that will infringe on other people's right to have clean air and clean water, and will give corporate entities too much control.
So they were kind of already in the early 80s there, they were already funneling this. And it's interesting because you mentioned Perrin Beatty, which, by the way, if anyone wants to look him up, it's Perrin, I believe. And his last name, Beatty, is Beaty. And he was fighting tooth and nail to keep the enjoyment of property in there, if I understood that
I don't know
correctly.
if it's fighting tooth and nail. He just had it in there and it got removed.
Okay.
Didn't seem like there was too much of a fuss about it. And what's interesting about that was that there were two submissions that were put forward under Sven Robinson, and one was from the Bar Association, and the other one was from a gentleman named Walter Ternopolsky. Walter Ternopolsky was a scholar, and he was also a professor, I believe, at the University of Toronto. And what's interesting to follow up on that is that Walter Ternopolsky, after that, went on to serve as the what did he serve? Ontario Court of Appeal, I think it was. So there were two submissions into the Special Joint Committee on the Constitution 1980-1981 that influenced. Had enough influence that it removed enjoyment of property.
And I find this especially interesting because we have this amazing Canadian Bill of Rights in 1960, and somehow by late 70s, early 80s, they're concocting some other freedom and rights document that, quite frankly, best as I could tell, was not even necessary for our country. And now you have some manipulation in there. So, that's only about 20 to 22 years later that they were trying to get this other document for our freedom and rights. And I find that especially interesting because there was no freedom and rights issues from 1960 to 1981, best as I could tell.
Well, there were because Trudeau had implemented the Emergencies Act.
Right. That was the War Measures Act.
That's right.
And then they ended up replacing that. So we had the Canadian Bill of Rights, but he was violating the Canadian Bill of Rights with the War Measures Act. And then that's why in 1985, right, am I wrong in saying that Perrin Beatty also had a lot to do with bringing that, kind of squashing that War Measures Act? Okay.
Yes, Perrin Beatty was instrumental in creating the Emergencies Act. Yes, he was.
To replace that War Measures Act that Trudeau Sr. was using back in, around the late 70s? When he was...
yes, it was. And during the FLQ crisis. Also, what's interesting with Perrin Beatty is, Perrin Beatty is still kicking it, and he actually is now the president of the Chamber of Commerce of Canada. I actually reached out to the Chamber of Commerce to try and speak with Perrin Beatty, and I got told, nah, get out of here. But they did have a look at the Stand4thee website. So probably like... what is this person on about? I would have liked to have talked to him because it seemed like he was somebody who was on the side of the people. But, he's in a position where he's the president of the Chamber of Commerce of Canada. So that's quite a senior and a significant role. But I haven't delved into the War Measures Act, but it would seem to me that the Canadian Bill of Rights most likely was not in it, or there was some kind of loophole that allowed Trudeau. The War Measures Act was enacted for a very long period of time. and he created, I don't remember how many orders, but much like Biden, when he got into power, it was executive order, executive order, executive order, executive order, like one after the other, which was acting under regal authority. And if you go back to the because again, we inherited UK law. If you go to the British Bill of Rights, under the British Bill of Rights, there's a section in there that states that acting under regal authority to either create or to modify laws is illegal. And it's spelled in Old English, actually. It's not even spelled in proper English. And sometimes when I share that quote with people, they're like, "You spelled it all wrong." It's like, no, it's actually Old English from this British Bill of Rights. So there was a lot of that in Canada, like, going back to the Emergencies Act. In the report from the House, it states in the report, Trudeau, it's as though Trudeau's writing it, right? It was like a memo. And he says, and that is when I decided to declare the emergency. That is not up to Trudeau to do. That is a role for right there, Governor and Council.
In Section 17 that we're talking about here. And again, because again, if one person can just come in and just start slapping his hand down, with a rod of iron and just do whatever he wants, you no longer have essentially what maybe some folks like to call democracy, right? Right. So if we like democracy, that's what the whole process here that they put into that I believe that Mr. Beattie had something to do with which was replacing the War Measures Act that Mr. Trudeau Sr. was using back in the 70s and replacing it with this, which is the Emergencies Act, which again, we're also citing further concludes that the Canadian Bill of Rights was being fully recognized in 1985. And so it's really, really important for folks to understand that what was put in place there was a process so that basically what Mr. Trudeau Jr. was doing this time is not supposed to be doing that. But yet he still did. And this is where we, a lot of us have conversations to say, look, the legalities of this, he basically overrided them, even though he doesn't have the right to do so. And I'm trying to explain to a lot of folks that we don't obey the person who occupies the office. We obey the office because the office is essentially already has this historical precedence of how we operate. So whether it's Harper, Chrétien, Trudeau, they're actually are employees, dare we use the term. I know people don't, but civil servantry, which
they
includes—
are 100%.
Right? And so they're actually on a higher hook, and I'm even speaking biblically, that to much is given, much is required. And the fact that he was, or anybody who's put into any kind of authoritative position, specifically something as high as prime minister, is supposed to operate in such a way that they're not only abiding by these civil liberties, but they're actually protecting them. That's their job, is to protect them and uphold them. And this is where that whole treason-esque discussion that I know that Stand4thee, and by the way, anybody who wants to know this, it's stand, and then it's the number 4, and then it's thee. And there's lots of case law there for you to take a look at and download for yourself. Mm-hmm. And
Thank you.
So because you are we appreciate everything that you're doing. And sometimes it takes folks, because you're working with Jane Scarf, who is a paralegal, and she's also been an activist since she was born.
Pretty much, yeah.
And again, we have to show folks that, these are the people that I'm going to suggest strongly you can see that historically, and even folks like yourself that are coming from, outside of the box, if you will. And that box meaning the kind of like the way that the folks that are inside the box operate, but sometimes when that becomes corrupted, it calls for people outside of that box to start exposing and shining a light on, hey, how you guys are operating is going in the wrong direction here. You're starting to do things that are inappropriate, and we can tell based on the precedents and the history of our country that we can see that things are not operating the way they were before. So you guys are doing something and heading in the wrong direction. And so what are your thoughts on this WEF? Because there's a lot of talk about the WEF, and there's a lot of evidence, like just literal evidence and discussion about this. And so what are your thoughts, and what are you guys doing, and how does that involve this kind of movement where you're talking about, no, we're very serious about Trudeau for treason. So please inform us.
Before we jump off of this, because I do want to clarify, because it's important that people do understand that the Bill of Rights is a federal bill that applies to federal matters, because this is a topic that comes up a lot, and I just don't want to forget. However, what people need to understand is that in Canada, matters of civil liberties are federal jurisdiction, meaning that the provinces cannot create laws that override our rights and our civil liberties, because and you go back to the BNA Act, the Constitution Act, 1867, I think it's 91.27, that states that matters of civil liberties are federal. So therefore, and we have case law, we have tons of case law to support this. So I just wanted to throw that in there before I forgot and we moved on.
No, that's great. And that's common sense, by the way. Just if you're ever anyone who's like kind of me, like the average Joe, I just remember that whatever rights I have, right, according to and I like to use the Canadian Bill of Rights, right? Security of person, enjoyment of property, to life and liberty, yes, which includes me being able to use a cell phone or whatever. If I have that in Ontario, right, I must have that same right when I go to Manitoba. It doesn't go away, which immediately has to hook into your brain to say, well, then this is national. It's federal. It has to be. Otherwise, it's just like the criminal code, right? Things that are illegal according to our criminal code in Ontario are also illegal in Manitoba. It's a federal level. So our civil liberties are indeed federal. So please continue, and thank you for because we got to hammer that into folks, because they like to use that line.
That's the whole like I'm gonna crush your spirit is, well, it's only federal. And I just wanted to, before I forgot. So going back to the WEF, so George Soros is a name that I've heard for many years. And George Soros he used to call himself a disruptor of democracy for a long time. And he's been behind the BLM movement, Antifa, BLM. When they were having those problems in the United States, buses would pull up, people would get out, they would start their march, and shit would ensue. Dung would ensue, because these were provocateurs. These are paid actors. These are not real people. And so George Soros, who is behind the World Economic Forum, who's also tied into the United Nations, it doesn't take long to see who's involved with the World Economic Forum. Again, Chrystia Freeland's on the board. Trudeau's involved. He was a global young leader. Jagmeet Singh was a global young leader. And I'm going to burst some bubbles right now when I tell people that Pierre Poilievre's campaign co-chair, John Baird, was on the World Economic Forum until about a month ago. But I download everything. I have the PDF with John Baird's picture on it and his title. And they've since replaced him with a name, John Baird, and they call him the professor of zoology at the University of Aberdeen. Like, could it be any more ridiculous? But his face was on there. I have the PDF. And, you're going to tell me that Pierre Poilievre is going to stand up and say, I will not allow any member to be part of the WEF, but I'm going to deliberately seek and hire and pay John Baird to be my campaign co-chair, when his face was on the WEF until just recently. Michelle Rempel, whatever her middle name is, I forget. Michelle Rempel is on the WEF. The former mayor of Calgary that's totally screwed up Calgary, Nenshi, was on the WEF. You can pretty much take the name of every big politician and type in, even in Google, their name and WEF, and you will find them connected. Or type in their name and United Nations, and you will find them connected. That's all you have to do. It is not hidden. There's no shame that they are a part of the WEF. Michelle Rempel, she tells people, oh, I went to Davos once, and like, they're not controlling the world. It was kind of like a sales conference. Oh, really? Really? Like, is that what you want us to believe? Do you think that we're so stupid that we don't know? So, we're dealing with, again, Blair, Mendocino, all of these guys. The executive branch of the government that's supposed to be a democratic society are all part of the World Economic Forum and are implementing actions such as 15-minute cities, the digital ID, the known traveler identification, you name it, that are WEF and United Nations Sustainable Goals 2030 agendas. So that is treason because it's undermining the government and it's undermining democracy. It is undermining the democratic process that we live under. And by the way, so does the charter, because if the charter says that allows for a judge to use discretion in making a ruling and to disregard legislation and case law, that is seditious and that is treasonous, because it again is undermining the democratic process and it's undermining common law. And our country is supposed to operate under UK common law, not Freeman common law, not my name is Rebecca the House of Sheppard and I'm only going to write my name in small caps with red pen and spin around the room 5 times and proclaim all this nonsense in the court. Not that. Common law UK, or UK common law, which case law, precedence law becomes law. And so we elect
and with the charter, what you're saying is with the charter, because of that application and how Section 24 of the charter is written.
26, I think. No, 24. You're right.
I think it is 24.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. You got a lot of numbers flying around. That allows, right, a state-paid judge all by themselves to kind of ignore all of that and just make a decision, even based on public opinion, and basically be real loose with all things. And this, of course, is not difficult to figure out, that when you have a single person, state-paid judge, it's not hard to make that go the wrong way, and of course, corruptible. And of course, that also eliminates where we also talk a lot about juries, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well,
there's no 12 folks there having a discussion and bouncing stuff around. There's just one person that's paid by the state making the decision.
That's what the charter tried to take away from us too, right?
Right.
But if you go back to the Bill of Rights, it says that you have the right to a fair and impartial trial, right? So we elect these people to represent the interests of Canada, and instead they're representing the interests of global entities such as the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and global corporate entities. And some of the big players is Deloitte and Touche, very big in this game. Interac is very big in this game. Of course, the IMF and the global banksters, very big in this game. There's very few countries that are immune to the agenda under the World Economic Forum and under the United Nations. So the World Economic Forum is more the digital aspect, and then you have the United Nations, which is the sustainable goals bullshit. Sorry. And you know what I say? Sustainability is a euphemism for genocide, because it's the guys that they're going under with this climate change, whatever they're going to call it, because they have to keep changing the name of it, because it's not global warming when it's snowing on Vancouver Island in April. This is insanity to try and convince us that we have global warming. And even right now, it's May, it's the end of April, and we finally just had the first sunny day in 2 weeks here in Toronto, and the heat's been on, and it's, don't tell me this is global warming. Even last year was not a hot summer. And what was crazy, Shade, is that we have a clock radio in the bathroom that I would just play in the mornings just to keep an eye on the time, so not having to look, right? And I stopped playing it when all this nonsense came out, because it was constantly like COVID, beating your head over with COVID. But they're implanting in people's brains that it was hot. I was like, it's only 28 degrees out. What are you talking about? It is not hot. I didn't even have the AC on. And then I would go out and people would say, oh, it's so hot. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And it's like, they're just, excuse me, it's going into their ears, into their brains, and they're not able to actually make an observation to say it's not. And it's not global warming. And also, this is the thing, and people just can't get this into their minds. Look, the Great Lakes used to be what? Why do we have the Great Lakes? What did they used to be? Glaciers. So what? You're telling me that the Arctic at some point just stopped receding? There was a point where it was like, okay, we're done melting. We're just going to stop. And nobody wants to talk about that the Antarctica isn't shrinking. And Plymouth Rock is still above the sea level, guys. Okay.
Well, it's funny you mentioned this because, I have a garden and that I work with, and my dad, he's always on it on the Weather Channel for us, right? He's on that deal, and they have the record highs and the record lows, and he's been telling me for the last few years, I'll just say, oh, you just note it for me, Dad, if you ever see a record broken. And he's like, yeah, no, they haven't broken one of the records in either direction. So everything is pretty much falling into the averages. Not one day was there a record broken in any shape, way, or form recorded. So the reality is that once again, it's that same kind of thing where if you kind of shoot it, I think was it Nixon that said something that the American folks won't believe anything until they see it on television, and then they believe it full through and through. And
it's the repetition. It's the repetition.
Yeah. Now I do think that a lot of folks, I'm grateful for this. A lot of folks are coming out of that, and little by little, we're having an effect, I think, and in folks like yourself, we're having a big effect, and people are starting to really come out of the idea that everything that is being said is actually true. They're starting to come out of that. A lot more folks are starting to turn off those television sets, right? But of course, we still have more. We still have more to do because they have lots of avenues and different ways to promote this this material. And it's propaganda essentially, correct?
Well, 100%. And what's happening right now, and again, guys, I just want everyone to understand what we're talking about is treasonous actions by all levels of government. It's starting with the municipalities and the 15-minute cities, which, by the way, Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, and Edmonton are all, and Toronto has been on the C40 program since 2005. So this has been underway since 2005 at the very least. And these 15-minute cities are a big wake-up call for people. And again, the city councilors and the mayors that are part of these action initiatives are committing treason because they're collaborating with a foreign entity to implement a foreign policy in Canada without any consultation with the people. And they are elected to represent us, not the World Economic Forum, not George Soros, not the United Nations, Canadians, me, you, us. And so this has really been the slap in the face that people need, because what's been happening in the UK is in Thetford. Thetfold. I literally just watched the video of the city council meeting where they actually shut it down. They actually, at least for now, have stopped the implementation of the 15-minute city. In Oxfordshire, in Oxford City Council in England, they are implementing, I should say, the 15-minute city. And, hold on one second. Sorry, I had to sneeze.
And you don't want to spread anything online here.
Well, no one needs to see or hear the sneeze. So they've implemented the 15-minute city, and this, again, if you go to Oxford City Council, 15-minute city, this is on the website. I am not making this up. The first thing it says is, come on, guys, we're not going to put in physical barriers. Like, that's just crazy. But what we are going to do is we're going to put cameras in that read your license plate. We're going to do that. And, if you got a car, that's cool. You can drive your car. but you only get 100 trips per year. And no problem if you go over the 100 trips per year. We're just going to fine you. You'll get a fine in the post, they say. And then if you're out, by the way, they're calling them districts. And Hunger Games districts. Are we going to start fighting each other over food? You know. And then they also say if you are not in the district, you can. By the way, you have to register your vehicle so that they know who you are. And then if you are not in the district, then you must get you must apply to come into the district, and then you get a whole 25 trips into the district. So say grandma lives in District 1 and you live in District 2. Between the two of you, you only get, it would be a maximum of 150 trips per year. Say 100 trips for your district, a 25 for her district, and she would get 25 for your district. Right?
You know, it's funny you mentioned about the whole fighting over food, because I like to have conversations with my dad, and he told me about his dad, right? Because that's a great way to kind of stay hooked on to some history. Mm-hmm. And my grandfather was in the First World War, and so he was in and of a time that actually people were positioned where they were actually fighting over dung. And I mean it, because they needed it for their soil. So people would actually argue and fight, and sometimes it could actually even come to blows over cow dung. I am not kidding you. And he told me that story. He says, and if you would have seen, he told me, he says, if you would have seen what I saw and what I heard from my grandfather, then I think a lot more folks would probably pay a lot more attention to the type of things that you and I are talking about right now, because that pinky in the brain spirit, if you will, still exists. You know, and there's always some folks, you know, and it's not that long ago, you look up even folks like Mussolini, right? That they lived through this where they could actually only walk, two people could only walk together. Anything more than two, they were separating people, right? And so red flags should go off with folks when they were hearing you can only have 5 people at your house, things of this nature. It's that same type of plan. It's that same type of vibe, because what they're trying to do.
The communist vibe. The communist vibe.
There's no question, because they're trying to keep people apart, keep the discussions low, and so and you know, keep this kind of thing to a very, very minimal-esque, so that this way you can't communicate properly and have good continuing discussions. They've even trained us from a long time ago. Hey guys, make sure you never talk about religion and politics. And this way, why? So that when you do, everybody gets all ticked off now, so you can't have that conversation. Well, that's another form of manipulation and freedom of speech, and training people to not be able to actually just have a polite or decent discussion and then still go play, you know, whatever, foosball or shoot a game of pool together. Like we don't have to agree on every single solitary thing, but they trained us to say, if you don't agree with us, or if you don't agree with this, then you're a bad person. And here we go. You're criminalized for your position, even though it's a legitimate position and has some good construct to it. But they trained us and families and friends to not have these conversations. And then you throw in some kind of, you know, what I call unrighteous decrees, and saying you can't have certain people or a certain amount of people in your home and this kind of thing. It's all leading in that same type of direction. And that's why we're here, to interfere with that, so that that doesn't happen, and to encourage everybody else to say, look, you know, get involved with this, call this out, don't comply with this nonsense, call it out for what it is. And we do indeed have to keep people accountable for what they did. We're not going to be thankful that they've stopped, you know, A and B, because that would, in other words, I always tell people, look, if you step on my neck for 3 years, when you take your foot off, I don't say thank you to you. I go, and we're going to do it this legally, of course, but legally I'm going to say, no, I'm holding you accountable for stepping on my neck for 3 years. That's what we're doing.
Especially when it's been illegal, when it's been unlawful at all levels. Because it's been illegal, and because, again, too much is given, much is required, and you took that power,
You took that power and you used it to abuse the very people who are entrusting you to conduct yourself properly and decently. We understand, people aren't perfect. We understand that, but this is way beyond, right, imperfection. However, on the upside, we did have the police, for example, that didn't do all the things, right? So we know there's quite a few still that are saying, we ain't rolling with this. And we got to encourage people to let them know that, listen, not everybody's on board with this. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, right? Like, this is, as you know, our position on this is that the police are not the enemy. The police were given the authority to stop us walking down the street, to stop us in our cars, to come into our homes. And they flat out said, we're not doing this. And yes, there were problems. I'm not going to pretend that they weren't, but there's an a-hole in every group. Okay. And even what we saw in Ottawa with the Emergencies Act, they had to ship them in from all across Canada and wherever else they came from, because I am not going to say they weren't from the UN. I can't say they were from the UN. Wherever they were from, they certainly weren't from Ottawa, and they certainly weren't from Ontario. And that tells you that there weren't even enough police in Ontario to do the dirty job. Okay.
Right. That's a big plus for us as Canadian citizens. And so that's where we got to keep people encouraged to say, hey, there's a lot of folks that are not for this, and they require us to shout out too, so that they can back us up, and to not fear, we have to step out. So what else are you guys like? What else can we do to encourage other people to get on board with us and to continue to call this out and to hold people accountable? Because I'm not satisfied with dropped charges, for example. I'm not satisfied with that, at least not in certain cases. So as much as I appreciate it, if someone got some charges dropped, that's great, but I still think
that's not solving the problem.
That's not solving the problem, because you should have never got the charge in the first place, is the point.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the executive branch of the government committed treason against the people of Canada. It is a crime. And if we don't take care of it, it will fester. And even if Trudeau is removed from office and somebody else comes in, then it opens the gateway for them to do it as well. Our job right now is to hold them accountable for the crimes that they committed against the people. And for also, let's remember, people were hurt. People were hit with tear gas. People were hit with rubber bullets. People were smashed. People had their, bones broken. They had their cars taken. They had their jobs taken, their accounts frozen. Some people still have their accounts frozen. So this isn't just a matter of, they broke up a protest. First of all, that's not what they did. I mean, Candace Ciro was run over by a horse, as was the other gentleman. And there needs to be an apology isn't even enough. You can't apologize for that. We live in Canada, a country where we have always been the rights defender for other countries. We used to send our troops to other countries because there was a rights violation, and we would go there to mediate and fix the problem. Well, what about at home when our rights are being violated here by our government that we apparently elected? So they need to be held accountable just as anybody else would be, just as if I broke the law, if I committed a crime. So the first thing we need to do is be brave and talk about it. Don't be afraid of judgment, because who cares? We've been judged for 3 years. Those of us who've been awake and we're pushing back, we've been ridiculed and mocked. So why not just keep going? Is it hurting you? No. Move on. Talk about it. Have a conversation. Just start the conversation and see where it goes. And if you got a bite, go for it. Tell the story. First you got to educate yourself and inform yourself. We have all the information on our website at Stand4thee. It's on the homepage. You can click through to read why it's treason. Excuse me.
And somebody asked me one time. They asked me, "Well, Shade, if we didn't have, this common law and these rights and the Canadian Bill of Rights, for example, then what would you do?" And I said, then I would still argue this position, because in other words, we have the law, which is awesome. That's great. But let's pretend for a moment we didn't. Then I said, then we would have to fight to get them in. Because this is still the right thing to give people freedom of speech, right? Freedom of conscience and faith, and freedom of religion, and freedom to assemble and to protest against unrighteous decrees. We know from history, we know this from history, that when those things are taken away from people, lives become broken, and pleasures, the anything that's decent about this life dwindles away, and a lot of folks won't want to pay the price to have to get it back, and we already have it, so let's not lose it. All we have to do is fight to hold on as opposed to fight to get it, see? So we can actually gain. This is part of my motivation, is just to say, look, I don't mind telling you, I had a much better life, I think, from the get-go. Like out the womb, my life was good. I mean, you know what I mean? It really was, especially compared to someone like my grandfather, right? And even my dad, he was raised in a lot of poverty. So I was really blessed in this life. And you know what? I mean this from the heart. I want my children and everyone's children to have the same experience, maybe even better if that's not all possible. But I certainly don't want to go backwards to times where you're told, hey, you can only walk with two people, or you can only have so many trips to go visit grandma, or how about this? You can't get a job in the medical field because you haven't hit the jabby stabby status that they're still continuing to require, which again is a complete violation of rights, and they have no precedence for this, not only not in law, but they have absolutely no reason to require it even now, because everybody knows, and it's already been out there that it's certainly not necessary to make sure that a person can be a good nurse or a good PSW or whatever, or a good doctor. It is not required. We know this now. They should completely drop that, take it away, and they're still trying to hang on to that. And so these are all the things that we're still continuing to say, hey, no. Because again, they didn't get a touchdown, but they ran the ball 10 yards. I want them to run. We're going to run that ball right back. And that's what our job is to do, to make sure people are still aware that, well, listen, hey, there's still some things that are hovering here. We got to hold people accountable for their crimes, but we also got to make sure that these folks understand that this is not how we ran the show before, and we need to undo some of this damage, and we're going to have to do that, and for our children's sake and their children's, because we want them to have the same type of freedoms and liberty that we've had in our lives, and we have to fight to maintain. We don't have to fight to get them because we have them. We just have to fight to maintain, because there's always someone showing up. You don't, and I always say this to folks too. I said, listen, you want to agree with freedom of faith and freedom of religion, regardless whether you're an agnostic or an atheist, because I'll guarantee you, if you don't have freedom of religion, someone's going to show up and say that they're God. I'll guarantee you. And it ain't going to be long before you're burning incense to a statue somewhere and hoping to get some kind of, libellus and a document that says that you can go into the marketplace because you've been good and you worship the statue today. So you don't want that kind of thing happening. And so what we do is we encourage people to recognize the Bill of Rights, recognize when a government has gone outside of their sphere of authority, and in fact, I won't say as far as we're concerned, have actually come against, in a treasonous way, against their own people who entrusted them to protect us.
100%.
And paid them to protect us. And that's what you guys
That's right.
do.
A lot of money too. And so don't be afraid to take action. And, this really starts at the ground floor. This is their whole MO from the beginning, has been at the ground level. The very first mandates that came in were from City Hall, and it was for the mass. And then it snowballed from there. And this is the subversion, right? And so let's play that game back at them. Go to your counselor, call your counselor up and ask them, hey, about this 15-minute city, are you for this? Are you against this? Where are you at with this, And if you have an ally, okay, what can we do about it? How can we stop this? And if you don't have an ally, well, guess what? We have an NOL on the site. It's an NOL for treason. You could serve it to your city councilor and give them the opportunity to correct the problem. They're not above the law. They're not above the law, especially in the municipal level. The same thing with the MPs, the MPPs, the provincial level. And Trudeau himself, they're not above the law. These guys are not above the law. We need to hold them accountable. We need to hold their feet to the fire. So in addition to publicly discussing the treason and why it's treason, now we didn't even get into the Chinese electoral interference, but that's another aspect that is circulating and it's a problem.
Do you want to comment on that?
I'll just, I mean, I don't want to spend too much more time. Like, I'll just say quickly that it's been a known issue since 1995. And here we are, 2023, still discussing it. 2 MPs recently quit over it. And as I was mentioning to you earlier, the entire board of directors and the CEO of the Trudeau Foundation resigned after questions arose as to the donations that came from foreign entities. Those donations did not exist until Justin Trudeau came into power. He was elected. He didn't come into any power. He thinks he came into power. And if you look at the donations over time, as soon as JT got in that seat, they skyrocketed. The Attorney General just admitted today that they're not going to investigate, once again, no investigation, or at least not a proper investigation, as to where these foreign donations were coming from, but we can bet dollars to donuts it was Chinese. Let's also look at Johnston, who was appointed to investigate the Chinese interference, has strong ties with China. So here we go, another Paul Rouleau incident.
And just to repeat, so you said that the entire board of directors of the Trudeau Foundation said,
and the CEO
resigned.
The
CEO said, "See you later." Mm-hmm. So that certainly suggests that there's something going on that they're even not comfortable with.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay.
They don't want the heat. Okay. And they may not all be in on it, but they're all jumping ship as fast as they can. And so the other fun thing, again, the Trudeau for treason. We're still accepting incident reports for people who were at the convoy who may have been affected or injured, I should say, or had their property confiscated or had their bank accounts frozen. We will be collecting those when we do the Trudeau for treason trail, which starts on Monday in Ottawa. And we need to get people to understand, first and foremost, why it's treason and what treason means, and how the treason was committed, so that they can process that and understand that and articulate that to others. And then that helps to, again, that empowerment. Okay, now I understand. Now I know exactly what's happened. And then from that, take action. Again, talk to your neighbors. Janice, Janice from our group, she's actually put together a package called Pass the Baton. And it's basically like a relay of information. It's a package to show you all of the information. And what she's been doing, she's been going door to door. Just in her neighborhood, she's done it all on her own. Just like knock, knock. Hey, my name's Janice. I live around the corner. Did you know? Did you know? Did you know? And of course, some people, get out of here. But she had some conversations with people who actually said, you know what, I'd like to learn more because I think this is wrong. And we've got the postcards that you can download and send to your MP. And I'll just show you one super quick. I've got one. I can see it. These postcards, where are we here? And this one's filled out. It's going to Krista Freeland. As you can see, I'm going to cover the person's name here. It's going to Krista Freeland. And basically, it's just like why the Emergencies Act was illegal, what they did. We have that on our website. Share the information. That's the biggest thing that we can do. We have all kinds of, on our website, stand4thee.ca, underneath resources, there is a link for like downloadables and shareables. Just start plastering this. Get it into people's minds. Get people to go, why? What's going on? Because we've reached critical mass. And between the WEF, between the digital currency, the 15-minute cities, the Chinese interference, the Emergencies Act, listen, we're at a breaking point now because it's extended beyond us, like movement people. And it's going into everybody's life because everybody from TD got that letter from TD that said, if you don't sign this, we're going to cut you off. You don't think that people are going to go, excuse me? You're giving, this is extortion. If I don't agree to your terms, you're going to cut me off? When did I agree to this? but we did agree to it. We just didn't know we did, right? All of these things are waking people up.
What do you mean by that? How did people agree to it and not know?
Because we all signed bank agreements when we opened our accounts, and they always said they can change their agreement. But this time is different because this time is adding in biometrics. It's not saying that they're going to be turning on the digital ID. And that's people are confused about that. But it's opening the door for it. And in this case, they want you to explicitly say, I agree. Whereas before it was just new terms and agreement, here you go. And it was there. And now this time, if you don't agree to it, they're going to cut you off.
Well, because it's something that I was talking about again, because I think we got to look at our history, and it's nothing better than getting like something from your dad. And he said, listen, like under those times when that kind of totalitarian vibe struck, he said people were afraid. Right. And of course, we know what fear does. Right. Fear just totally demoralizes people.
Yes.
And it puts them in a frozen state. And then that's, it's never going to play out. But it can certainly, I always tell people, just like lies, fear, doubt, those types of things, they have a degree of power. They don't have true power, but fear is a lie. That's right. Fear is a liar. And but if they convince people to be afraid and that they should be afraid, right, then indeed they will have some level of success. So that's why we continue to I love to repeat, of course, I'm a Bible guy. He said, fear not, fear not, fear not. Because ultimately, quite frankly, the cost of that is going to far outweigh any kind of, potential ridicule or nerves or, the butterflies in the stomach. Just tough through that because the reality is if we allow that fear to take too much control, then they're going to run the ball further, and we don't want that. And again, they'll run it not because of any other reason, but because you thought that you couldn't make any difference. But every one of us can indeed push back and make a difference. They need our compliance, and if we don't comply, they really do. They really do.
And let's remember they used to say, with the old recycle campaigns or the green initiative campaigns, if we all do it, then it makes a big difference. It's the same thing. Even if 10% of the population took action, we would see significant change. And this is, me, Shade, you are enough. You are enough because if you take action, you inspire somebody else to take action. If I stand up and use my voice, that inspires somebody else. That empowers somebody else to use their voice. And if I grow a pair and decide, you know what, I'm not going to put up with this, and I'm going to hold people accountable. The people who violated me and caused harm, I'm going to hold them accountable. And people have had success with this. And this is the thing, going back to, it was Thetford in the UK. They shut down the 15-minute city. They managed to control themselves because this is the thing that I'm seeing. You cannot go into a council meeting and freak out and start screaming at people because then you become the enemy. But if you go in there and you say, hey, how's it going today? I'm your constituent. You're my constituent. I'm your constituent. I'm in your riding. I vote. I voted for you or whatever. I have some questions for you about this thing. Have you thought about this? Are you aware of this? Do you know about that? Do you understand? Because a lot of people don't. They've been brainwashed into thinking that, won't it be great if we have a 15-minute city where you can just Joshua Matlow, who is a counselor in Toronto who's running for mayor. I'm staying at my friend's house and she lives in an apartment building, and two canvassers knocked on the door and I was like, oh, let's chat. And so I was like, is he aligned? Like, what's the deal with the 15-minute cities? And they were defending it. And I was like, so do you not think that most people have what they need already in Toronto? Well, my grandmother doesn't. I said, okay, so is your grandmother going to walk to the grocery store and minus 30? No, exactly. And are you not going to go visit your grandmother? And it wasn't clicking in his mind. And then I was like, you guys need to do your homework. And I talked to them. I said, this is all coming from the World Economic Forum. This is a foreign entity. This is what's happening in Oxford. Like, you guys need to do your homework. If you're going to be knocking on people's doors, trying to sell through a politician, then you should know what the politician stands for.
And by the way, am I the only one that finds it strange that we went from everybody spread apart to, hey, let's get everybody locked into a sardine can? Like, am I the only one that kind of finds all this a little peculiar that, like, it's like, how come you guys aren't promoting getting away from each other and, having nice 1 acre farms or whatever? No. We're going to pile you up in the same sardine can so that this way, when we run another C19 thing, that now what are we going to do? Like, you know what I mean? So like, I look at all this stuff. It's like, don't you see the double-tongued messages here? That
it's ridiculous.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
It's a joke. It's a joke.
It's a joke. But we need to call these people and say, look, call out to people and say, look, these people use this stuff to confuse. So again, fear, confusion, lies, propagation,
and turning on and off is what they kept doing, right? At first, they take it from you. And then you get used to it, the restraint, and then they let go, and then you're free again. And then they would pull it back, let it go, pull it back. So it's like you kind of give up because you don't know what's going to happen, right? So then you just let go of hope, number one. And then there's that confusion and I actually did an infographic in 2020, I think, on abuse or something. I forget what it was. And it was control. And it was all of the mechanisms that they use to control people. And one of them is turning it on and off. Cutting you off is we all know that when, that friend that goes into that relationship and all of a sudden they're cut off, you don't hear from them. And then you hear afterwards how bad their relationship was because they weren't connected with you because their partner cut them off. And I know from experience that if somebody gets into that relationship and all of a sudden they're cut off, I get concerned. And sometimes it's positive, but you have to be careful because that was cult. That's what it was. It was a cult or something. That's the first thing, right? Cut them off so that nobody knows what's going on. And you start to lose perspective, which is what happened to a lot of people. They got used to being locked up. And I'll tell you something, Toronto is a very different city than it was in 2019. And it's quite sad what's happened to the city, and it's dead. And there's no life, and I'm not even going to continue because it is sad. But I want to get back because I know the clock is ticking here to the things that people can do. And again, we have these notices of liability. We have one for the digital ID. We have one that you can use for any level of government. It's simply a treason notice of liability. And I want to tell you something. I don't know if you know this, Shade, but right now we have somebody taking a judge to small claims court for violating their rights. A cop is going to court. A crown attorney is going to court. A PHAC officer is going to court. We've got 5 individuals who are suing a single employer from Toronto. We have a woman who's taking a federal employee to court for revoking her firearms training license because she had an Trudeau discount program. So people are taking action in the courts. And as you know, the whole point of small claims court is that it is the people's court. You don't require a lawyer. It's quick, it's easy, it's inexpensive. And this is how we can get them, because the people, the ones committing the crime are individuals. Trudeau, Mendocino, in Toronto, what was the mayor's name? What was his name? John Tory, Doug Ford. They are no one special. They are nobodies. They're just like us that have these jobs. And we need to bring them back down to earth. And that happens by holding them accountable.
Right.
And, union heads, whatever, we need to hold them all accountable so they stop abusing us. We don't deserve this abuse. They have no authority over us. And if we don't hold them accountable, then they think that they do, and it will continue.
And that's the other thing too, right? Because that because I'm rolling through the book of Revelation, and there is a positioning of placement where someone has a degree of authority and they can abuse that authority, but they're still influencers, right? So, entertainment industry influence, right? But same thing with obviously politicians, and they can actually get, right, other people to start essentially parroting what they say and start acting out that kind of verbiage. So when you kind of say, you know what, these people are non-essential, for example.
Yes, exactly.
Then people got comfortable with that kind of language, and they actually got comfortable with
and defended it.
It says, well, too bad for you. You're non-essential. Well, what can I say? I get, what, excuse me? Like when did this become okay? Well, it became okay because if a leader, right, says it, right,
yes,
then I guess you can too. It's kind of like, it's like anything, right? So if a parent is doing something in the home, it ain't too long after before that child potentially mimics that. Now, they could be mimicking a good thing, or they can be mimicking a bad thing, but they can mimic, right? So I hate to say this, but the reality is a lot of folks started parroting these kind of catchphrases that were put out there. And, I still kind of remind everybody, I said, you realize I'm non-essential, right? According to you, I'm still non-essential. Now, I don't believe you, but you did say that. And I'm going to hold you accountable for that. See, and I've been talking to people, I'm going to hold you accountable for that because I don't owe you an apology. Right. And by the way, it better be a sincere one too.
Yeah.
I'm pretty big on that.
And just like, let's just think about how ridiculous that was. You were not essential enough to earn a living, to feed yourself,
right,
to clothe your family, to put a roof over your head. You were not essential.
No.
But I was.
Right.
I was. But you, no.
Yeah.
You have to live in squalor and miss your car payments and maybe your mortgage payments and maybe lose your business and maybe have to let go 10 of your staff because you're not essential. You're not important. Your life is not essential.
Right.
That's what they were saying.
And people parroted that. And that's why, even scripturally, I'm always going back to them. That's why we're right. Jesus so often scolding who? The Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, the chief priests, because they were the influencers. That's where they were positioned in this life. And it's too much is given, much is required. And they were influencing people, right, to do the opposite of what was actually in their law at the time, which, of course, biblically at the time, it would have been called the law of Moses. So, we've talked about the adulterous woman, for example. Well, if you look at the Levitical law, even keeping it very pragmatically, there was just the woman. This is a charge of adultery. You require the male to be present. And he was not. See, so you can see the corruption. Why? Well, because they're taking their position, right? And where much is given, much is required, but they're operating opposite. He cites in the, I would actually move people to Matthew 23. He cites extortion. They were performing extortion and coercion.
Yep.
They were absorbing widows' houses. And I think if you look at that script, you can see that what essentially he's saying is they were taking advantage of people in weaker positionings. Right, especially I'm guessing, a little conjecture on my part, but my guess is that a widowed woman without the protection and the supply of potentially her husband, right, might have been in a position of a weaker state, and they took advantage of that. See?
Yeah.
So these are the types of things that people who are influencers, right, can cause to occur and cause other people to mimic their inappropriate behavior based on a really warped ideology and quite frankly, propaganda and catchphrases, and they throw in a little fear in there, right? Throw in a little bit of confusion, spread apart, get together, spread apart, get together, spread apart. Hey, everybody get apart, 6 feet apart, keep going. Oh, okay, everybody in a 15-minute city. Wait a minute, I thought you said we had to spread apart.
Yeah, right.
So you see all that stuff. It's got red flags all over it as to what's going on. And we have a great, great, wonderful recent history that we can use, as well as even further back in history, to see that this is the kind of behavior that we're supposed to, I think that we're called to call out, shine a light on it, so that this way people can see how much dust is in the corners on this thing. And so I'm really appreciating everything that you're doing and with Stand for Thee. And so we definitely, now I know you wanted to talk briefly too about C11.
Oh, well, I haven't really dug into it, but it passed today.
Okay.
And so,
took a while to pass
2
that,
years,
though.
2 years.
Okay.
2 years. And effectively, the Senate doesn't have a lot of control in Canada, right? It goes to the Senate. It could die on the Senate floor, but they made amendments. It went back to the House, and the House said, no, we're not going to accept them. They did remove user-generated content, but there's still some sections in there that they wanted to come out. And you know what I think is, like, come on, guys, take action against these people who passed it. Go look on the Hansards. Look at the people that voted yes. And if that's your MP, go after your MP. You want to take away my right to free speech? No. And where do you have the authority to do so?
And this is another one that my dad actually brought up in our conversations. If people were afraid to say things, people were afraid to say what they thought. And that is again, another clear sign. And one way to get them to win is stop saying what you want. That's one way to do it. And then when they pass bills that come against it, you not saying to those MPs that what just passed is absolutely inappropriate, totally illegal, totally immoral. Not only is it against the laws of the land, but it's against the laws of God. So you got lots of material and lots of precedents to say, look, your representatives are not supposed to do things that cause you to, again, shut your mouth on your opinion. Please continue.
Yeah. And the worst part about it is that, once again, it's deferring the discretion to a private entity, which is the CRTC. And, get the dinosaurs out of here. I can choose whatever content that I want. You're not the boss of me. And I just found a group earlier today on Twitter, which, oh, God, I can't stand that site. I go on there in 2 seconds, I'm mad at the world. They want to censor, what was it they wanted to censor? They didn't like something, and they're lobbying the government to censor it. And it's like, have we not learned from history that censorship is a bad idea? And this whole concept of censorship, and I've had these conversations with my friends. First of all, when you have censorship and you determine what hate crime or hate language is and offensive language is, first of all, I might not agree with that. But what that does is it shuts down the conversation. So those things are still going to exist, but they're going to fester underground where we don't see it. And if we're not aware of it, we can't have conversations to combat it and to bring it to the light. It's still going to be there. It's just not going to be out in the open, and we're not going to know about it. And so it's ridiculous to think that censorship is going to stop the problem. It's just going to put the blinders on the problem. And then
again, who gets to control, right? Who gets to say,
who's making the decision?
Right, this is okay and this is not okay, right? So who gets to make these decisions, and what is it based on? What moral grounds are you basing it on? Are you basing it on precedents, history?
Big brothers. Big brothers.
Right? It's just whoever. So these are all dangerous places to go when we're talking about freedom of speech, and that's why the Canadian Bill of Rights is so important, because that, if you take a look at every one of those rights and what has gone on in the last 2 to 3 years, you can clearly see that those are the right in the center nucleus, because really every single one of those got hit. Every single one of those got hit, which is further proof that those are indeed the central rights and liberties that a nation needs in order to have the kind of lives we had from when we were born up until fairly recently. Those are indeed, history has already taught us, we don't have to learn this again At least I hope we don't have to learn this again, but we don't have to learn this again. The precedence is there. They've done this before. It's all over our history. This is the wrong direction. When you start slamming, listen, I don't like everything that people say, but I'm certainly not for taking away their freedom to be able to say it because of all the reasons we've already learned. It doesn't help in any shape, way, or form. It only harms. And then ultimately, it usually just basically takes bottom line is it takes the let's say the more humble in spirit or humble in positioning, what do we want to call middle class, lower class, you take your pick. It takes those are the folks that get most affected by those positions, because then, of course, those folks who are kind of making the decisions, they're kind of allowing those unrighteous decrees to sit in right where they're at. And even if they don't, it doesn't matter. And we saw that type of hypocrisy going on. So we really do. And we really do have to kind of cite that out and go, look, the precedence in history is there. It's there. Yeah. So we need those freedoms. They're fundamental. And there's just any time a country loses those or anyone who's trying to take those away. It's subversion.
Because it's just, it's for your own good. We're going to take out hate speech, right? Yay, hate speech. But that's the subversion, because that's a rights violation. And now you've just allowed it. And then it festers. That's the problem. It festers. Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. And of course, taking words and saying that these words are hateful, it's like, well, I've had the experience where someone told me that the word deer was a hateful really?
Exactly.
I was like, are you kidding me? Because when I look it up in the dictionary, it comes from the word endearing, and in no shape, way, or form is that an offensive word. So again, now they can have that opinion if they want, but they do not have the position to tell me that I can't use that word as often as I'd like. And that's just the way we have to stand. And if we don't stand on that, then you're going to be very, very surprised as to how weakened a nation can get by citizens not putting this as a huge priority. And you're going to be really, really sorry for what you have lost. And especially because you already had it. You already had it. It's already locked in. It's been codified in the Canadian Bill of Rights, for example. So all you have to do is stand firm in the position on what you already have and hold people accountable, right, for the atrocities if it's something that is, garnished. Again, if, somebody got a little upset at you, a couple of years ago at dinner time, and you want to kiss and make up, that's fine. But when people are in high powered positions, right, and making decisions for the entire nation and come against people who are peacefully protesting or passing bills like C-11 telling me, no, wait, we're going to censor you here, we're going to censor you there. I have every confident position that is going to continue to go in a wrong direction. And that's why we're here to push back on it and make sure it goes back into the right direction. And if there's anybody out there that's hearing this, not only should you do it for yourself, but you should do it for your children and your grandchildren. And for those folks, by the way, there might be some folks who don't have children. Well, guess what? There's somebody's child is going to be the one in that old age home taking care of you. What kind of person do you want taking care of you? What kind?
There won't be an old age home, Shade.
That's even worse.
Let's remember what they want, right? Let's remember what these people want.
Right. There could be some really, really nefarious things going on.
Could be
underneath that. Could be.
Maybe.
But that's why we're here, because we're gonna get in their way and we're gonna
shed the light on it.
Shed the light, man. And that's what it means. Again, I like to go to my scriptures all the time. That's what he's saying. Don't put your light under a bushel. Who puts a light under a bushel? No. You got to shine that light. And what does that mean? It means expose them, right? Ephesians 5:11. No. You expose the darkness. You expose it. You shine a light on it. And that's what we're called to do. And I think that that's what you're doing. And I so greatly appreciate what you're doing. And I appreciate, of course, Jane, who oftentimes works for you. Dave Freedom, too. Shout out for him.
Dave,
Kelly Hale, what he's doing to bring a lot of attention. And there's so many folks.
Yes. And I got to give a big shout out to Mitchell in the East Coast, and the East Coast crew, and Ivan and Eric, and there's so many people. There's so many people who are taking, doing whatever they can. And I'm going to give a big shout out to Kimberly Woolman too.
Yes.
She did a fantastic job. She unfortunately got a terrible ruling, but she's got excellent grounds for appeal. And unfortunately, the mainstream media picked it up and has painted her as this evil person. And she's having a tough time right now. She's been threatened on social media, and it's really frustrating because I saw the evidence, and those things didn't happen. And it's really disappointing that, it's expected. It's expected. They had to make try and make her to be something that she's not. But she's got excellent grounds for appeal. And you know what? She's going to fight it. So, and this is what we have to do. We're in a war. These are the battles that we have to fight because we are in a war for humanity. And so she chose to go all the way, and she's going to. So I'm really proud of her. And I just wanted to give her that shout out because she's worked so incredibly hard, and she's just an awesome lady.
Yeah, she really is. And that the fact that she's willing to continue and endure, and that's another thing that scriptures talk about, enduring, going through the whole thing. And I appreciate. I know sometimes it's difficult to go all 15 rounds. It really is. I understand that. With all that said, I think that's the calling. I think the calling is let's go all 15 rounds. And I really, when you're thinking about it, just ask yourself, what's the other option? The other option is quite frankly not an option as far as I'm concerned. So, really a big shout out. I'm glad you mentioned her. She really is. And it's also, by the way, proof positive as to how they can really, if they want to, they can smear a reputation. It doesn't take much. And
that's their job, right? That's their job.
It's part of their deal, right? Yeah. So, and then let's just do a little plug because we got something happen on Cinco de Mayo. That's
right. Well, Windsor. Actually, May Day. It starts on May Day in Ottawa.
Okay. In Ottawa?
So May Day in Ottawa, we're kicking off the Trudeau for Treason Trail. We're meeting at Parliament Hill at noon. That's in Ottawa. And then we're going to Belleville on Tuesday. We're going to Toronto on Wednesday, Niagara on Thursday, and Windsor on Friday. Meeting at the Flag on the waterfront, and we got a lot of speakers, including yourself. And I'm really excited for this. And what we're doing is we're again spreading the word Trudeau for Treason, giving people the information so they understand why and how, and so that they can educate and inform themselves. We're going to have actions there. Kimberly sent us her tablet, so we're going to have a tablet so people can do the declaration in the moment. We'll have our postcards and buttons and shirts and all kinds of stuff, and just hearing from people and their stories for the past 3 years. And then we're going to head over to City Hall. We've got the treason notice of liability, and we're going to serve it to City Hall in a very respectful manner, and just let them know you don't get to do this to us. You don't have any authority over us. What you're doing is against the law, and the people have had enough.
I love it. I love it. I'm just so thankful that you were able to make some time to come and talk to me. I'm looking forward to seeing you on May 5th. And so anybody who's heard this and you guys know about the website, once again, stand and then the number 4thee. And is it .ca or .com, really?
That's right. It's both, yeah.
Okay, it's both. So you're good there. And if you need some case law, if you need to check out what they're about, please do check that out. And of course, if they're in your area, go out there and support them, and of course in a loving, peaceful way, and really shine the light in this world that we love our freedom and liberty that we have in this country. And please do get behind. And of course, take any advice that you've heard today. If you got to make a phone call to an MP, a mayor, whatever you got to do, get involved with this because it's very, very important for you and your children and your children's children. And I know that when you do a good work, God brings the increase to it. And I thank you, Rebecca, for doing everything that you're doing and for talking to me today. Thank you so much, Shade. Thank you for having me. All right. Look forward to seeing you, sister. You got it. All right. Talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.